Our fourth speaker is the director of the Peninsula Peace and Justice Center in Palo Alto, California, for which he has served for 20 years. He actually worked for the Gene McCarthy for President campaign when he was a teenager, and also served as West Coast organizer for Quest for Peace. During the 1980s, he traveled extensively in war-torn El Salvador to witness firsthand the effects of war and U.S. foreign policy on civilians. The gentleman about whom I'm speaking is Mr. Paul George, and currently he is working on two major issues. One is on the economic crisis, and certainly justice would need to be part and parcel of that issue. And secondly, issues related to peace and justice in the Middle East. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Paul George.
Thank you, Ethar. I'm going to make you happy in two ways. I'm shorter than you, and I drank my tea.
I like you already.
Where did your dad go? I wanted to thank Wahid Siddiqui for the invitation to speak tonight. Is he still here? Hi, Wahid. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to see you again. Wahid used to be on the board of directors of Peninsula Peace and Justice Center, and you're lucky to have him on your board. I want to congratulate Uma on your 30th anniversary. Our organization turns 30 years old next year, and I know how difficult it is to keep any organization like this funded and going for 30 years. I'm a political organizer, so I tend to look at a lot of these questions through the lens of American politics, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to probably touch on some themes that Michael started off the conversation with. And I think we've had a really good, broad presentation here, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A. I would like to propose that what we're calling Islamophobia probably has a lot less to do with various varieties of religious experience in this country than with America's long history of what historian Richard Hofstadter called the paranoid style of politics, or what has more recently been called the politics of fear, or even the politics of victimization. The U.S. has a long history of such politics, of this kind of paranoid politics. Hofstadter, by the way, coined that term in 1964 to show you that this is nothing new in American politics, talking about the growth of the conservative movement back in the early 1960s. Paranoid politics relies on large majorities of Americans being convinced that their lifestyle is in danger of being lost to some vaguely dangerous minority. When people of the sort like Sarah Palin, Michelle Bachmann, other Tea Partiers say that we need to take back our country, and a little parsing of that phrase that we hear, taking back our country. Take it back from whom? Other Americans, right? That's a whole other conversation. But when they say things like take back our country, they really aren't expressing anything new in American politics. And in fact, you can find that sort of rhetoric in the last 150 years of American politics. The paranoid style of politics, or again, politics of fear, politics of victimization, you know, oh, we're being victimized by these Muslims. They're threatening our way of life. We're the victims. Has been, again, a constant throughout American political history. Not because those who promote this sort of politics may even believe it, but they have found it to be extremely effective in attaining and maintaining power in this country. Just a few quick examples from history, and I think it's important to keep in mind in our history and how deeply ingrained it is. This is actually my point, that this is a deeply ingrained thing in American politics, and if we are going to confront it effectively, that's where we have to start with the understanding. One of the most divisive domestic political debates that this country ever engaged in was over prohibition during the teens and early 20s. Prohibition started as a mainly anti-Catholic movement, because it was the Catholics who, had wine at their churches. It also was anti-German, because they were the main brewers and manufacturers of alcohol, and anti-Irish, who had double whammy because they were drinkers and they were Catholic. The Red Scare of the 20s and 30s, when people were trying to organize for the first time into labor unions in response to the Great Depression, in response to employer oppression and worker exploitation. And people were rapidly convinced that these were communists, that they were totally against our lifestyle. When in fact, these men and women who formed the early labor union movement set the standards for middle-class life as we know it today. And yet they were the others at the time. They were the threat. They were going to ruin. We all remember the gross injustice of the internment of the Japanese Americans during World War II. Not that any one of them had anything to do with the attack on Pearl Harbor, but they were all rounded up a really dark period in our history. And probably the most significant for our current period is the whole paranoid politics attitude of the Cold War, which lasted 45 years and absolutely defined American politics in the post-World War II era up until the early 1990s when the Soviet Union collapsed. If you weren't anti-communist enough, if you were seen as soft on communism, you didn't get elected to office. So the threat of the international communist conspiracy defined American politics, and actually politics in this country was a little lost and wandering in the woods after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Who was going to be the new enemy threatening our lifestyle? Who was going to take our lifestyle away from us after that point? The rhetoric of the Cold War is pretty interesting to look back at. And remember, this was defining rhetoric in this country for 45 years. President Dwight Eisenhower started a program, an anti-communist program called Crusade for Freedom. Recognize that term, crusade? It, quote, reached out to peoples deeply rooted in the heritage of Western civilization, end quote, who were living under the, quote, crushing weight of a godless dictatorship, end quote. All of this anti-communist rhetoric and the paranoid politics of the Cold War era had a lot of religious overtones to it. It was the way that these things were phrased. And attributes of global communism through these 45 years of American history, from the time at the end of World War II, as America was emerging as the world's leading superpower, and now only superpower. The attributes of global communism were things like bent on taking over the world, taking over control of the world. Have we heard something about Islam along those lines? They can't be trusted with their rhetoric of peaceful coexistence. Have we heard that recently? Their very existence imperiled Western civilization. And they fight with a unique savagery because they don't value life as much as we do. Have you heard some of this rhetoric reflected recently? I think you have, because all of these things have been said about Islam in modern times. It's the Cold War recycled for the new era. and Muslims are the new communists.